The sharp crunch of tires on gravel sliced through the low hum of the dryer in the utility room where we sat, a jarring sound that made my heart skip. My son, Ethan, raised his eyebrows, his 12-year-old face alight with curiosity. My daughter, Sophie, barely 6, sat taller in her tiny plastic chair, her small hands gripping the edge of the table. Headlights swept across the cracked plaster wall and halted at the back door of my sister Laura's sprawling estate in Willow Creek. I squinted through the frosted glass of the narrow window above the dryer, my breath catching as a sleek black limousine, not some neighbor's SUV or a delivery van, eased onto the gravel path leading to the backyard. Ethan leaned forward, his voice a hushed whisper. "Mom, that car!" I stepped beside him, the pecan pie box still clutched in my trembling hands, its faint nutty aroma mixing with the detergent scent of the room. A man in a crisp black suit, wearing a chauffeur's hat and pristine white gloves, opened the limousine's rear door with practiced precision. A woman emerged, her presence commanding yet serene, her heels clicking softly but decisively on the gravel. She wore a charcoal wool coat with a high collar over a knee-length knit dress, the fabric catching the faint glow of the estate's outdoor lights. Her silver hair was neatly pinned up, framing a face etched with the lines of a life fully lived, yet untouched by bitterness. She scanned the backyard with calm purpose, then her eyes locked onto the window where we stood, as if she'd known exactly where to find us. Sophie's voice trembled, barely audible. "Mommy, she's looking at us." I swallowed hard, my throat tight, and cracked the back door open. A rush of cold November air swept in, carrying the crisp scent of snow and a faint trace of lavender from the woman's scarf. "Hello," she said, her voice clear and confident, cutting through the night's chill without being loud. "I'm looking for Emma Carter." I froze, my fingers tightening around the pie box. "Yes, I'm Emma," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. She smiled slowly, a warmth in her gaze that felt both unfamiliar and grounding. "Good. I'm Margaret Hensley, Executive Director of Empowered Voices, a foundation supporting single mothers and women pushed to the margins." My mind reeled, struggling to process her words. How had we ended up here, tucked away in this cramped utility room, under a flickering fluorescent bulb that cast harsh shadows on the bare wooden table and 2 folding chairs? The dryer's rhythmic thumping seemed to mock our isolation, a stark contrast to the laughter and clinking glasses drifting from the dining room. Earlier that evening, I'd spent hours in my tiny apartment kitchen, kneading dough and roasting pecans for a pie my cousin Clara had praised at last year's gathering. The invitation to Laura's Thanksgiving, like every year, was a formality, a courtesy extended out of obligation rather than desire. My name was always the last scribbled on the guest list, but Ethan and Sophie's excitement, their wide eyes and eager chatter about seeing their cousins, had made it impossible to say no. We'd arrived at Laura's mansion right on time, the estate's stone walls draped with twinkling fairy lights, garlands framing every window in festive elegance. Ethan clutched my hand so tightly I could feel his pulse, while Sophie carried the pie box with the care of a museum curator holding a priceless artifact. Laura opened the door, her smile polite but sharp, her deep green silk dress shimmering as if she were about to step onto a stage. "Emma, you made it," she said, her tone clipped. I leaned in for a hug, but she stepped back, her eyes flicking to the pie box. "I told you not to bring anything this year. Pecan pie? Let's hope it's not too rich." Without waiting for a reply, she turned and glided back inside, her heels echoing on the polished hardwood. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of roasted turkey, nutmeg, and cinnamon, mingling with the chatter of elegantly dressed guests gathered around a long, magazine-worthy dining table adorned with crystal candelabras and linen napkins. We stood awkwardly by the entrance, unnoticed, like ghosts among familiar faces. No one offered a seat or a greeting, their conversations flowed as if we were invisible. I forced a smile, set the pie on the cluttered kitchen counter, and helped Sophie shrug off her coat. She looked up, her brown eyes wide with confusion. "Mommy, why isn't anyone saying hi to us?" I knelt to tie her shoelace, my fingers trembling slightly, and whispered, "They're just busy, sweetheart." "Don't worry," Laura returned, her eyes glued to her phone. "I checked the seating chart, Emma. It's a bit tight. You don't mind sitting in the side room, do you? There's a small table in the utility room. It's been cleaned." I blinked, certain I'd misheard. The utility room? Yes, it's clean and quiet, she said, winking as if sharing a secret. Better for the kids than squeezing in with the adults. Ethan's grip tightened on my hand. Sophie's gaze dropped to the floor. I managed a faint smile, picked up the pie box, and followed her directions past the back door to this stark room, where the dryer hummed and a single bulb buzzed overhead. I set the food down, served 3 small slices of pie no one else would touch, and sat on a folding chair, the cold metal biting through my thin dress.
Hello. Thanks for watching and being part of this journey. If you enjoy story like this, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support means the world. Now let's dive into the story.
Laughter from the dining room pierced my composure, each burst a reminder of our exclusion. Sophie's voice pulled me back to the moment, her question soft but heavy. Why doesn't Aunt Laura want us to sit with everyone? I forced the smile I'd perfected over years, the one that hid the ache. It's not that they don't want us, honey. They just don't understand. Ethan looked at me, his voice low. Maybe next year we shouldn't come, Mom. I didn't answer immediately, my eyes tracing the faces of my children. One still grappling with why we were cast aside, the other pretending he no longer cared. In that moment, under the utility room's harsh light, I realized this wasn't a celebration. It was a lesson, one I'd learned too many times before. Margaret's voice brought me back to the present, her words steady and purposeful. I'm here because of a blog post you wrote last year on a local forum, about rebuilding your life after living in a shelter. My heart stuttered. That post. I'd typed it on my cracked phone screen one sleepless night. Ethan burning with a fever, Sophie curled up asleep on our sagging couch. I hadn't written it for attention, just to pour out the weight of those years, to keep from breaking. I never imagined anyone would read it, let alone find me here. Your post spread through our network, Margaret continued, stepping closer, her coat brushing the doorframe. We've been searching for you for 6 months. When your name appeared on an old volunteer registry, I decided to come myself. She glanced around the utility room, the chipped table, the plastic chair, the half-eaten pie, and her expression softened, not with pity but with understanding. I didn't expect to find you here, she said. My cheeks burned, a mix of shame and disbelief. I didn't expect to be found in a utility room, I replied, my voice catching. Ethan squeezed my hand gently. Sophie still clutched the hem of her dress, her eyes wide. Margaret's smile was warm, unwavering. I'm here to invite you to be a featured speaker for Empowered Voices' upcoming Inspiration series. We'd like you to be our keynote speaker at the spring conference, to share your story from the beginning. No filters, no embellishment. You'll be compensated fairly. We also want to publish your story as a book, with full editorial control in your hands. I stood frozen, the pie box nearly slipping from my grip. Part of me doubted her words. Another part felt a flicker of relief, as if a door long locked had creaked open. Are you sure? I heard myself ask, my voice small. I'm just a mom trying to survive. Margaret looked at me as if I'd said something absurd, her eyes steady and kind. That's exactly why we need you, she replied. We don't need polished success stories. We need people like you, real, brave, and still moving forward, step by step. Ethan looked up at me, his voice urgent. You'll do it, right, Mom? I glanced at him, then at Sophie, whose wide eyes held a quiet hope, then back at Margaret. Yes, I said, the word steady despite the tremble in my chest. I will. Margaret nodded, her smile deepening. The car is waiting. If you're ready, we can talk more over dinner. I glanced back at the folding table, the half-eaten pie, the plastic cups we'd used as if hosting our own private feast. Let me grab my coat, I said, setting the pie down. No need, Margaret replied, her tone gentle but firm. We'll take care of you from here. I took Ethan and Sophie's hands, their small fingers warm in mine, and stepped out of that suffocating room. The cold wind stung my cheeks, but my heart felt inexplicably warm, as if a spark had ignited deep within. When the limousine's door shut behind us with a soft thud, I knew the world had shifted, not because I'd fought for a seat at Laura's table, but because, for the first time, my worth had been seen. The limousine glided toward a restaurant Margaret had reserved in Riverside, its interior plush with soft leather and a faint scent of polished wood. Ethan sat beside me, clutching the pie box like a talisman, while Sophie leaned against my side, her wide eyes tracing the limousine's softly lit ceiling, its tiny lights like stars. Outside, Laura's neighborhood faded into the distance, the twinkling lights of Willow Creek blurring like a memory being quietly erased. Margaret smiled through the small divider window between us and the driver, her presence a steady anchor. "I know this might feel sudden, Emma," she said, her voice warm, "but I've wanted to meet you for a long time." I turned to her, still dazed. "You said you found me because of a post." "Not just one," she nodded, her silver hair catching the light. "A series of short posts you shared over 6 months, after you left your ex-husband. You wrote about working night shifts at the diner, scraping by with $3 for gas, turning a packet of instant noodles into a living room party for your kids." I read every word, and I cried. My cheeks flushed, not from shame but from the weight of being seen. I'd written those posts in the dead of night, perched on a creaky wooden chair in our tiny apartment, the kids asleep, the world silent except for the hum of my thoughts. I'd never thought anyone would read them, let alone someone like Margaret Hensley, whose name carried the weight of advocacy and change. "I still remember one line," she continued, her voice soft but resonant. "I don't want my kids to think they have to toughen up to survive. I want them to know they deserve to live, to breathe, to dream." She paused, looking at me with an intensity that made my chest tighten. "I've never read anything so honest, Emma." I clenched my hands in my lap, trying to steady my voice. "I just wrote so I wouldn't fall apart," I said, the words barely audible. "And that's what made it powerful," Margaret replied, her eyes never leaving mine. Empowered Voices is hosting our spring summit soon, bringing together activists, writers, educators, and single mothers from across the country. We need someone to open it, not with credentials or polish, but with heart and lived truth. I want that person to be you. I looked at Ethan and Sophie. Ethan sat still, staring out the window at the passing lights, but his hand rested lightly on his sister's shoulder, a quiet gesture of protection. Sophie stayed tucked close to me, nodding softly as if she sensed the shift in our lives, her curls brushing my arm. "But I've never spoken in front of a crowd," I said quietly, my voice tinged with doubt. "I'm not a polished speaker." Margaret placed a hand on her chest, her emerald ring glinting. "Emma, what moves people isn't Polish, it's truth. And your truth is what they need to hear." I fell silent for the rest of the ride, the limousine's smooth motion lulling my racing thoughts. When we arrived, the driver opened the door, and I stepped out with my children into the cool night air. The restaurant was tucked into a quiet corner of Riverside, its understated facade glowing with warm amber lights, the scent of fresh-baked bread wafting through the entrance. We were led to a private room, where a polished mahogany table held a customized menu for the evening and a thin folder placed directly in front of my seat. Margaret gestured toward it, her movements deliberate. "This is a preliminary contract. If you agree, we'll cover everything: travel, lodging, childcare, whatever helps you focus on telling your story." I opened the folder with trembling fingers, skimming the neatly typed text. My name stood out in bold at the top: Emma Carter, keynote speaker, Empowered Voices Spring Summit 2026. I exhaled a long, choked breath, a mix of relief and disbelief washing over me. I'd once thought the years I spent struggling, working double shifts, stretching every dollar, writing blog posts on a battered phone, had left nothing but exhaustion in their wake. But those late-night words, the journal entries I'd assumed were forgotten, had become a bridge leading me out of the shadows and into this moment. Margaret raised her glass of water, her eyes locking onto mine with a quiet intensity. "I believe in you, Emma," she said, "and I think it's time you believe in yourself too." I'd never imagined a night that began in a utility room, with its cold light and humming dryer, could end in an elegant restaurant beside a woman who'd read every word I'd written in my weakest moments. Margaret didn't just speak kindly, she treated me as someone who mattered, not an afterthought barely included in her sister's world. When she slid the contract closer, I hesitated, my eyes catching the bolded words on the first page: Emma Carter, author and keynote speaker, Empowered Voices 2026. I read it again, slower, half expecting the words to dissolve if I blinked. Is this real? I whispered, my voice barely audible. Margaret nodded, her smile patient and unwavering. Very real, Emma. You're not imagining it. She went over the terms with calm precision. Her organization would cover all expenses for me and the kids during the conference. Airfare, hotel, meals, on-site childcare. A team of professional editors would help shape my speech and manuscript, not to alter my voice but to amplify it, to help me tell my story in its fullest, most authentic form. I looked down, realizing I'd been gripping the cloth napkins so tightly my knuckles were white. Ethan reached over, gently taking the pie box from my hands and setting it aside, as if he knew I needed to let go of the night's burdens. Sophie rested her head on my shoulder, her wide eyes quietly absorbing every detail of the room. The soft glow of the chandelier, the clink of glasses, the weight of this moment. She spoke just one sentence, her voice clear and certain. Mom, they chose you because you are you. I turned to her, tears stinging my eyes, and smiled. For the first time in my life, I wasn't Laura's sister, or Mrs. Carter's daughter, or the divorced woman scraping by with 2 kids. I was simply Emma, the one who wrote with her whole heart, not knowing if anyone would read it, but writing because I couldn't stop. Margaret lifted her cup of tea, the golden light catching on the sapphire ring on her hand. I once told my team, she began, her voice steady, if you want someone who can shift the mood of an entire room with their real, unfiltered story, find Emma Carter. I laughed, a little embarrassed, brushing a strand of hair from my face. I used to write for 20 readers, half of them single moms I met at the community center, I said. And now, Margaret replied, her eyes gleaming, you'll write for thousands. They need you more than ever. When dinner ended, I signed the contract, my hand trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of a quiet, internal shift, like the final gear clicking into place. The limousine carried us back through the city, gliding past streets I'd once walked with heavy steps, past diners where I'd scrubbed counters until dawn. Those places didn't sting anymore. They felt like pieces of a mosaic, each one part of the journey that led me here. Ethan whispered, his voice tinged with awe, Mom, you kind of look like a celebrity. I shook my head and squeezed his hand. Not a celebrity, honey, just respected. I turned to Margaret, my voice thick with gratitude. Thank you, again. She smiled, looking at me not with pity but with recognition, as if she saw the woman I was becoming. Emma, they didn't give you a seat at the table, she said, but tonight, you were handed a stage. I nodded, feeling lighter than I had in years, a weight lifting from my shoulders. I knew from now on, I wouldn't be knocking on doors, begging for a place, I'd be building my own. As I closed the limousine door, I caught a glimpse of my mother through Laura's dining room curtain. She stood frozen, wineglass in hand, her face caught between shock and confusion, as if the world had tilted without her permission. Beside her, Laura gripped her wine stem so tightly I thought it might snap, her lips parted but silent. My brother-in-law leaned against the fireplace, phone in hand, his eyes following the limousine as it pulled away from their iron gate. I'd once dreamed of leaving that house with my head held high, proving I belonged. But I never imagined I'd leave in a limousine, my children by my side, with a powerful woman ready to amplify my story to thousands. Ethan sat across from me, his eyes sparkling with excitement, a grin spreading across his face. Sophie leaned into me, her small hand resting on mine, as if anchoring herself to the reality of this moment. Did you see them watching? Ethan whispered, his voice barely containing his glee. I nodded, a small smile tugging at my lips. I saw. Sophie's voice was sweet and clear, cutting through the hum of the engine. Think Aunt Laura thought she was the most important person in the family, she said. But today, she wasn't. I brushed her hair gently, my heart swelling. Today, they watched, and I was heard. Margaret turned to me, her voice soft but resolute. I've seen many moments like this, Emma, when someone is finally seen for who they truly are. But this one, I'll remember it most. I didn't respond right away, letting the emotion settle, steady and warm. Not the sharp pain of exclusion, but the quiet healing of being acknowledged. The limousine turned into the city center, where holiday lights sparkled on every block, the glow reflecting off the windows like tiny beacons. I remembered past Thanksgivings, standing in line at a church for a frozen turkey, splitting the last potato so Ethan and Sophie could eat their fill. Those years weren't wasted. They built the foundation for this moment, each struggle a brick in the path that led me here. Margaret reached into her leather briefcase and placed a small folder on my lap, its weight grounding me. "There's one more thing," she said. "We've spoken with a publisher in Seattle. They read the draft manuscript our editors assembled from your blog posts. They're very interested and want you to develop it into a full memoir, not just in print, but an audiobook read by you." My eyes widened, my breath catching. "Me? I'd read it?" I asked, disbelief coloring my voice. "Your own voice," Margaret smiled, her expression radiant, "because it carries something no one else can replicate: truth." I felt a door swing open inside me, not just as a speaker or writer, but as a storyteller, my voice carrying the weight of every late-night post, every tear-soaked journal entry. "So, where do we start?" I asked, my voice steadier now. "Next week," she replied, her tone brisk but warm. "We've got a studio in Portland ready. We'll provide accommodations for all three of you. Ethan and Sophie can explore the city, and if you're open to it, we can pair with a local TV station to share your story." I laughed aloud, the sound bubbling up unexpectedly. "This is really happening, isn't it? This isn't a dream." Ethan raised his eyebrows, a mischievous grin spreading. "If it is, I don't want to wake up." Sophie nodded hard, her curls bouncing. "Mom, don't ever go back to that house again." I looked at her, then out the window, watching the golden lights blur past, each one a reminder of the life I was stepping into. "No," I said softly, "I won't go back. From now on, I'll build my own home." The limousine pulled up to a small hotel Margaret had arranged, its facade glowing with understated elegance. The driver opened the door, and Margaret waved goodbye, reminding me of the press event scheduled for the next morning. I held Ethan and Sophie's hands as we stepped into the hotel lobby, the marble floor gleaming under soft lights. I could hardly believe that just 3 hours ago, we'd been in that utility room, the dryer's hum drowning out our voices. Deep in my heart, I knew this journey was just beginning, and this time, I'd walk it on my own terms. No more bowing, no more asking for permission. The morning of the first conference arrived faster than I'd expected, a whirlwind of nerves and anticipation. I stood backstage, clutching my speech, its pages marked with yellow sticky notes Sophie had carefully placed the night before, her small fingers precise and proud. Ethan sat in the front row, his chosen shirt making him look older than his 12 years, his posture straight with quiet pride. Sophie was beside him, gripping the conference program like a treasure, her eyes darting to the stage. When the MC called my name, a rush of electricity surged through me, my pulse pounding in my ears. I stepped onto the stage under soft white lights, the room falling silent. Hundreds of women from across the country, some in tailored suits, others in simple sweaters, watched me with open, hopeful eyes, their faces a tapestry of stories waiting to connect with mine. I took a deep breath and began, not with grand gestures, but with the truth of where it all started, the utility room at my sister's house on that cold Thanksgiving night. I told them about the years in a one-bedroom apartment, working 2 shifts a day at a diner, blogging at midnight to hold myself together when the world felt like it was crumbling. I didn't sugarcoat the struggles, the shame of standing in food lines, the sting of feeling invisible in my own family, the exhaustion that clung to me like a second skin. And I spoke of the moment I stepped into that limousine with my children, the night I left the past behind and chose a life defined by my own worth, not someone else's approval. When I finished, the room stayed silent for a heartbeat, the air thick with shared understanding. Then one clap broke the stillness, followed by another, and soon the entire room erupted in applause so loud it shook me to my core. I felt tears prick my eyes, but I held them back, standing taller under the lights. One woman stood, then another, and soon the entire audience was on their feet, their faces alight with recognition and hope. I couldn't believe it. This wasn't a dream, but a reality I'd stepped into. After the speech, I spent 2 hours meeting attendees, their hands clasping mine, their eyes shining with stories that echoed my own. One woman had lived in her car with 2 toddlers, her voice trembling as she thanked me for giving her hope. Another had just left a stifling marriage, her smile radiant with newfound courage. A retired teacher, her hair streaked with gray, told me she'd felt invisible in her family until she heard my words. "I don't need permission to exist anymore," one woman said, her voice firm. "Thank you for saying what I've always felt." That sentence lodged in my heart, a reminder of why I'd said yes to Margaret's invitation. A month later, my book, More Than Enough, officially launched, its release a milestone I could scarcely comprehend. The cover featured a black and white photo of me, Ethan, and Sophie, hand in hand, crossing a busy street, a symbol of how we'd walked through the noise of the world and found our way back to each other. I cried holding the first copy, not because I'd written a book, but because my name was printed clearly, unshadowed by anyone else's, not as Laura's sister or someone's daughter, but as Emma Carter, author and voice. Messages poured in, emails, comments, handwritten letters, each one a thread in a growing tapestry of connection. People shared photos of their favorite passages, dog-eared pages marked with tears, or told me they'd read the book in one sleepless night and felt held by its words. One message moved me so deeply I sat in silence for nearly an hour, letting its weight settle. "I used to think my worth only existed if others saw it, but you helped me realize real worth is in how we keep rising every time we're pushed aside. I don't know if I can change the entire world, but I know I've touched someone's world, and that, I realized, is enough." That evening, as I washed dishes in the kitchen of our new apartment in Brooklyn, the sink's warm water soothing my hands, Sophie hugged me from behind, her voice a soft whisper. "Mom, do you know how many people called you inspiring today?" I laughed, turning to meet her bright eyes. "I'm just someone who learned not to ask permission to be herself," I said. Ethan looked up from the couch, his homework forgotten. "You didn't just learn it, Mom, you taught us." I stopped, dried my hands on a dish towel, and sat between my 2 children, their warmth anchoring me. I'd once thought I was nothing but the leftover pieces others discarded, the scraps no one wanted. Now, I knew I'd always been more, a whole, unbroken self, carved from resilience and love. A year after that fateful night in Laura's utility room, Thanksgiving came around again, but this time, I wasn't standing outside a locked door, hoping for a seat, or sitting silently in a cold, forgotten room with a paper plate. This year, Thanksgiving was in my small Brooklyn apartment, its walls painted a soft cream, the air warm with the scent of pecan pie and roasting turkey. I woke early to prepare the meal, the kitchen filled with the clatter of pots and the rich aroma of herbs. Ethan took charge of the mashed potatoes, mashing them with a focus that made me smile, while Sophie busied herself crafting handmade thank you cards for each guest. She designed every card herself, decorating them with tiny star stickers and writing in glittery ink, "Thank you for being the real family to me and my mom." There were just 8 of us at the table. Margaret, who arrived early with homemade butternut squash soup, 2 friends from last year's conference, Sarah and Maria, their laughter a bright thread in the room, and our elderly neighbors, Henry and Grace, who'd once lent me a pan when I first moved in, their kindness a quiet gift. None were blood relatives, but each had shown the kind of love I'd longed for my entire life. Margaret entered with her usual confidence, her quiet grace making everyone feel valued without a word. "This is the first year I skipped the office party," she said, setting the soup pot on the counter. I smiled, tying an apron around her waist. "Well, today you're not the director, you're my sous chef." She raised an eyebrow, teasing, "Sous chef? You might want to rethink your leadership style, Emma." Laughter spilled from the kitchen to the living room, warm and unguarded. Ethan turned on a soft jazz playlist, the notes weaving through the air, while Sophie darted around, ensuring each fork was perfectly placed, reminding me with a giggle when I forgot the napkins went on the left. We gathered around a small round table, too small for all the food, so some dishes sat on a nearby bookshelf, but no one minded. Henry shared the story of meeting Grace at a community dance decades ago, his voice thick with affection. Maria talked about her project supporting single mothers in Queens, her eyes alight with purpose. Sarah, her hands still dusted with clay from her pottery class, spoke excitedly about her first exhibition. I sat there, listening, my heart full, watching my children with a gratitude too vast for words. As the meal wound down, Sophie stood, holding a folded piece of paper, her small frame radiating determination. She cleared her throat, serious as if addressing a classroom. "I have a speech," she announced, and everyone chuckled softly. "The first Thanksgiving speech," I whispered, my voice catching. Sophie began, reading slowly but confidently. "Last year, I ate Thanksgiving dinner in a utility room. I didn't understand why we were placed there, but this year, I get it. Because if we hadn't been put there, we wouldn't have found the place we belong. Today, I know I'm home." I covered my mouth, tears slipping down my cheeks before I could stop them. Margaret gently placed her hand over mine, giving it a soft squeeze, her own eyes glistening. Ethan stood after his sister, his voice quiet but steady. "Mom, we're proud of you. Thanks for never stopping." I stood too, raising my glass of apple cider, my voice trembling but clear. I used to think family was unchangeable, those who gave birth to us or raised us. But now I understand family is the people who choose to love you freely, every day. Today, I'm surrounded by the family I built with my own heart. We clinked glasses, not in perfect unison, but with a sincerity that filled the room. After dinner, Sophie pulled out an old board game, its pieces worn from years of use, and Ethan replayed the video of my conference speech on his tablet. I didn't stop him. I'm no longer afraid of hearing my own voice. That voice belonged to a woman who'd once felt invisible but now knew she didn't need permission to matter. That night, after everyone left, I sat in the kitchen, holding a warm mug of tea, the candles flickering low. A new message came from my mother, as it did every year. Cold, brief. "Hope you're doing okay. Happy Thanksgiving." I didn't respond right away. I looked around our little apartment. The crumbs on the table, Sophie's glittery card still at its center, the echo of laughter lingering in the air. I smiled. I was okay, more than okay, because I'd found a family that didn't need to share my blood to be part of my soul. A week after Thanksgiving, I received an invitation from the National Women's Summit. They wanted me back as a guest of honor for the closing session, not just to speak, but to join a roundtable with women who'd heard my speech the year before and made transformative changes in their lives. I said yes without hesitation, knowing my presence wasn't about proving myself anymore. It was about listening, sharing, and reaffirming a truth. Sometimes, being pushed aside isn't the end. It's the beginning of something far more meaningful. The summit was held at a newly opened cultural center in Denver, its glass walls reflecting the city's skyline. When I walked into the auditorium, I felt no fear, only a quiet confidence. I wore a soft blue suit designed by Maria, my dearest friend from last year's conference, its fabric cool against my skin. Pinned to my jacket was a small wooden table brooch, the symbol of a new project Margaret and I had launched. Build Your Own Table, helping women build careers and confidence from the ground up. I sat among 6 women, each a living testament to resilience. One had been shut out by her family. Another had overcome abuse, unemployment, or profound loss. But they all shared one thing. They'd heard my story a year ago and asked themselves, if she did it, why not me? The first to speak was Ellen, a retired librarian with a gentle voice. She said that after watching my video, she'd volunteered at a skill center for single mothers. "I used to think I had nothing left to offer," she said, "but I realized worth isn't in titles. It's in making someone feel seen." Next was Tanya, a mother of 3 who'd once been homeless. Now, she ran a small cafe near her children's school, her face glowing with pride. I watched the part where Emma said, "We don't need to ask for seats. Build your own table." I started saving pennies, digging up my grandma's old recipes, to carve out my own place. I listened to each voice, my heart swelling with something raw and real. Faith, effort, and dignity rediscovered. When it was my turn, I set aside my prepared notes, stood, and took a deep breath, looking into the faces before me. "I used to be the one behind a closed door," I began. "I thought I had to be softer, smarter, less troublesome to earn a place at someone else's table. But the truth is, sometimes people don't reject you because you're lacking. They reject you because they don't know how to value you. That says nothing about your worth. It only means it's time to build your own table." I saw Margaret's eyes glisten from the audience, her smile a quiet affirmation. Ethan sat in the third row, taller than I remembered, his face beaming with pride. Sophie waved, her lips tight as she fought back tears. I'd once sat in a utility room, believing I was an extra piece, a leftover no one wanted. But that room wasn't the end. It was the start, the place where I stopped asking to be seen and began choosing to believe I already mattered. The room was silent, not from disinterest, but from a shared understanding, a collective breath held in recognition. These women weren't just an audience, they were proof that when you stop waiting for an invitation, the world opens in ways you never imagined. The event ended with hugs, exchanged cards, and promises to keep building more tables together. That night, in my hotel room, I opened my laptop and typed the first line of my second book. Not everyone needs a seat. Some of us are meant to have a stage. I looked up, catching my reflection in the mirror. Not the woman pushed into a utility room, but the woman at the center, with a voice, a heart, and a life that no longer needed permission to begin. Emma's journey is living proof that sometimes, being pushed to the margins is exactly how we find our true worth. From a single mother cast aside by her own family, she rose to tell her story in her own voice, inspiring thousands. Emma no longer lives to be accepted, she lives to be herself. In doing so, she found success, healing, and a chosen family built on genuine, unbreakable love.